look at your top competitors' content. When coming up with content, it is important to be as specific as possible with who you're targeting, casting a wide net and providing broad information on your content may yield some traffic, but as far as monetization goes, the visitors you attract probably aren't interested in your products and services. Now, this is obviously, I think, leaning towards website and stuff like that, but we've kind of hit on this before about, how there's really no originality anymore and how you kind of have to get ideas, kind of look and see what your competitors are doing and maybe find out a way to do it better or slightly different.
In terms of working smarter, not harder, I'm not sure. And I'm trying to think of how this one could save you time. This is an area where we've scratched on, but we haven't really gone into it too in depth, and it's audience development. A lot of us who are creators, we kind of understand when we're making, I'm going to go through the gaming creator example again because it's the closest one I know. We know that we're targeting gamers, but I don't think a lot of us as creators really actually look at audience development more in detail, specifically what demographics, what gender, what part of the world are they from, where and when do they watch content and on what device. Audience development is a really important marketing tool and it's used a lot in advertising, but it should also be used a lot in your content creation. We haven't hit on too much on it, but the competitor analysis, what they're talking about here, would be part of that. Looking at who your competitors are targeting, and are they missing part of the core target audience that you could capture, right? Is there an opportunity there? How to shorten that stuff and make it working smarter, not harder? I mean, that's it right there. If you can do the competitor analysis just right, you will find weak spots. And you exploit those weaknesses. You do what they aren't doing. You pick up where they're slacking. And that's how you can grab an audience that maybe is being underserved. I'm trying to think of a great example here. I know that when we were doing TGN, this is not going to be long story time, we would always look at one of our competitor analysis we would do on Machinima at the time. This was years ago when Machinima was a little bit more of a thing. And what we would pick up, we did one specifically for Twitter, and what we would pick up was that they were missing particularly good gaming humor content. They were missing kind of being relatable. They were putting out good content for sure. And we were definitely considering them one of our competitors for that reason, one of our better ones. But there were areas where they were missing, and we knew that if we filled in those gaps, we would pick up on those audiences that were being left out there, and it worked whenever we would do it. But you have to do your competitor analysis well, and you have to do your audience development well. It relies on those two things.
Yeah, and I think for this, when it comes to being a shortcut, I personally, when I'm creating content, the hardest part, the part that probably takes up in the big picture the most time, is just coming up with ideas. Trying to figure out what kind of content to make, what's trending and stuff like that. If you have, I hate using the term competitor because we're all kind of on the same page, but if you go and you can look and see what your quote unquote competitors are doing, the successful ones, you can kind of get an idea of what's trending. You can kind of get an idea of, what in this instance, a gaming audience is kind of looking for. And then you can adjust and make it something of your own. So I think that's probably about the only shortcut necessarily out of there. But for a competitor analysis, I think that's actually very important. If you're a content creator and you're, trying to figure out missing holes, like you said, like with Machinima, missing holes and the people that you would consider yourself to be closely related to, you can find competitor analysis free sheets online. You just Google competitor analysis spreadsheet or competitor analysis Word document, and you can download them for free, and it explains everything, how to fill it out. And that is a great way to consistently kind of keep tabs on what other people are doing, but also, fill it, in the end, it shows you what other people are missing essentially, and what you can then do better to fill in the gaps that they haven't done. Because I can guarantee you a lot of creators and stuff are not using competitor analysis. This one is from Inc.com. It's called Trim the Fat. So the problem is, okay, Perrin, let me ask you this first off. Are you a list maker?
Nah, not really.
Yeah.
I keep it just all up here in the head. I don't really write. I have a notebook that I use, but I definitely don't make lists in my notebook. I just scratch notes. I'm a note taker, not a list maker.
Right. So I am the list maker. I do all of that. And this one kind of makes the most sense because when you're trimming the fat and you have a list of things that you need to do, which before each day starts off, I make a list of everything that I need to do for today. So in the instance of a content creator, make it a list of everything you need to do, by the end of the day, to make sure you're getting your content out the door. And if it becomes a big list, it can be incredibly intimidating. So at some point, you just got to start trimming the fat. You got to take off the parts that are, going to be taking up the most time, the ones that are not going to make a huge difference in what you're doing. And that can range from many other things. You have anything to add to that? That one seems kind of basic.
Yeah. So you have to look at, I guess you have to take the whole gamut of all the things you want to do. And as a content creator, there is so much to do, and you're going to have to put it into kind of a priority area or like long-term, short-term. Like maybe I can't do this stuff now, but I'll put it off for later. Maybe similar to if you guys are homeowners, if any of you have ever owned a home, as homeowners, you'll know that there's always this running list of things that the house needs, and you never fully cross that list off. It always exists. You just scratch at it when you can, where you can, over the entire period that you own the house. But there's always stuff on that list that you never quite get to, or there's always things on the list. There's always a list. So I think content creation can be the same thing, in which there's always going to be things that you maybe want to do but can't get to right now, or maybe it's years down the road, and you have to be okay with that. For a great example right now is right now I'm live streaming, but I don't have a Twitter strategy executed. I'd really like to have a good Twitter strategy executed, but I just don't have the capacity to do it at the moment. I don't have a good content flow, and I don't have the time to put into it. But do I have it on my list? I sure do. Right? But and I reply on there and engage where I can. But to have a great strategy on there, I would say I don't have a strategy, but I would like to. That's what I think we're talking about here. There's just so much to do as a content creator. You got to focus on the most important priority aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. The bottom line of that is prioritize, just like you said. This one I actually kind of disagree with. I'll be interested to get your opinion on. Create and stick to a routine. And here's the quote. We are creatures of habit, and so are our brains. When we establish routines, we carry out tasks faster since we don't have to think about the task or prepare for it as much and can work on autopilot. I think there are some advantages to this. However, in content creation, a lot of times you're going to be doing a lot of the same things every single day. And maybe I'm speaking specifically to myself. When I get into a routine of doing something and I can work on autopilot, and this is, with work, with anything in life, it's very difficult to get out of that. Do you share that experience at all?
Yeah, routine is definitely good. I'm trying to think, because this is a bit counter to something that we were talking about last week, where we're talking about and do the 80-20 rule, interject some newness into it, which would mean kind of going against the routine a little bit or changing it up, and how doing so can actually lead you to feel happier and more fulfilled. So I think routine is good, but here's maybe an example. Something that I do with my streaming is, I do a 2-hour stream every weekday at the same time, 10 a.m. to noon. But what I like to try to do is throw in a random evening stream in there to change up the routine and to keep it fresh, and to maybe have an opportunity to get a different audience and an evening audience in there seeing my content. So I do have a routine, and I try to stick to that so people know what to expect and they know when to come. And also it helps me getting into the workflow. It helps me have that work routine, which the work routine is important. But it also gives you something to look forward to if you change it up and give something new. and it helps make you interesting and kind of fresh because you are trying new things in different places at different times at the same time. So I would say it's kind of a combination of both of what we talk about here on the Digital Drop Pod.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Here's one that I really do agree with. And we're talking about, as a content creator, how can we relate these steps from the article to working smarter, not harder? And this one that, I had to think about it for a second, but I actually really do agree with it. Prepare the night before. There is something about when you're creating content, and this goes back to literally what I was just saying a second ago of why I need to change up my routine and my patterns, is the first thing I do, like I said, I get up and create a list of everything I need to do. When I first wake up and I realize that I have to go through this list and write down everything I need to do, it automatically starts my day off almost in a stressful way, where I'm sitting down writing, I see all this stuff that I have to do. Where if you're preparing the night before, you can wake up the next day and just immediately jump into it. You've already gone through the process of thinking about it, gone through the process of, figuring out how am I going to have time for all this. You can just immediately jump in and start working on it. Do you ever prepare the night before?
Yeah. And the best days I do,
yeah.
Like I almost have to. And when I don't, it shows. And there are times where I just can't, I don't get to, because life can be so busy sometimes, and I don't get the chance to prepare the night before. And if so, the next day becomes so much more stressful because I'm like scrambling just to get things to operate on the normal routine. And I actually completely agree with that one, especially with doing this show in the morning, and then I do like a stream right after. It's so important to prepare the night before. Otherwise, I'm trying to like do all this really important work like thumbnail, title, stream descriptions, making sure the configurations are all set up correctly. And there's a high likelihood that I'll mess one of those up. And some of those are really important, like the title and thumbnail, or probably more important almost than the actual stream itself. And as we're finding and more in our testing, and we're going to have an episode kind of about that. And AWOL and I were talking about that over the weekend, about how titles are important. Anyway, that's an anecdote. We'll get to that. And then maybe another episode when he comes back. I want to wait for him for that one. Anyway, those are important elements. You need to spend time on those. You can't just rush them. Otherwise, there's almost no point in having a piece of content come out, because you've rushed probably the most important elements of it. You didn't spend the time on it. So take the time in the evening to prepare for the next day. I completely agree.
Yeah, and that can just be as simple as laying in bed, while you're watching TV, you have your phone up. Like that's where I typically make my list. You can actually make like little check boxes on the iPhone, and just run through just a quick list off the top of your head of things you need to do. So that way you're not starting off your morning completely stressed out, coming up with all these things that you have to do, because it's just not necessary. We get ourselves so psyched out. At least I know I do. So I think that's one thing. And we've actually talked about this with the podcast. We're like, okay, we should probably start planning ahead what we're going to talk about. Yeah. Because what happens is we usually show up, we go live, between 8 and 8:10 every morning. We show up about 7:50. We're like, okay, what are we going to talk about? That's work for us. But, by preparing the night before, it also gives you that extra amount of time to plan and coordinate and come up with these shortcuts where you can literally work smarter instead of harder. Where if you're starting your day that way, you're just kind of jumping in. You're not giving your brain time to digest what you're actually doing. This one's interesting. This is from Inc.com. To work smarter, not harder. Stop multitasking. We all believe that we're multitaskers, but in fact, humans aren't capable of doing multiple things at once. People can multitask very well, and when people say they can, they're deluding themselves, and this is from a neuroscientist. The brain is very good at deluding itself. Instead, we're simply shifting our attention from one task to another very quickly. Do you consider yourself a multitasker?
I'm not sure I consider myself a multitasker. I would say that I'm a product of social media management. And so when you get pings and messages that you have to deal with, you just got to deal with it. So I'd say more like I have like fractured attention because of that. But I wouldn't say it's efficient by any means whatsoever. And I can see what they're saying there. It comes down, so this makes me think about my brother, who's a web developer, and when he's developing, he tries to set up his workspace so that he can't be interrupted, because once he's pulled from that, it's hard for him to then come back to where he was and remember his train of thought and where he was going. And it like breaks the concentration, and it breaks up his productivity, because it takes time to kind of reacclimate himself back into what he was programming. And that's a good example of how our brains work. You know, if we're really in depth and critically thinking on a task and we get pulled from it, it takes time then to reacclimate back to what we were doing, especially if it's something like either mathematically complex or just something that requires kind of deep critical thought. In order to come back, so you just wasted a lot of time, because now you have to kind of acclimate yourself back to that task, which is wasted time, right? So I can see what they're saying. However, in the nature of social media and the creator space, I think it's inevitable that this is going to happen. Think about live streaming as a great example. You have to either play a game or present on camera while also constantly having chat. The whole concept of it is fractured from the get-go, right? So being good at that multitasking thing, I do think you can actually get good at doing that, and you can become good at it when it's formulaic like that. And you almost have to as a creator. You almost have to. You almost have no choice. You have to be able to like handle multiple things at one time. And unfortunately, that's not the case. But if with some other professions, but I think if you're like into a video edit or something like that, and you really want it to be good, then that's a good time where you can try to build your workspace where you don't have any distractions, and you can just work really hard on a single video. I think that's probably where the concentration shines as a creator, and that's where you would not want distractions, where you might want to shut off your notifications, where you just want to put the hours in to make that video the best. So I kind of see that from both angles, I guess.
Yeah, I think in some areas it's possible in content creation, but like you're talking about live streaming and stuff like that, like you're not going to have a choice but to multitask. And I had never considered it before, but I guess, and this is from a neuroscientist, when they're studying people who are multitasking, you can actually see the brain struggling to do it. So I think what they're suggesting is maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I hadn't really thought about that. When you're multitasking, compared to focusing on one thing permanently, and then trying to focus on two things, you're obviously less likely to make mistakes on one or two things. So I can see from that angle, that would be a time saver. But at the same time, I don't know if this is necessarily the field for where, you can't multitask. Are you familiar with Parkinson's law?
Yeah, I mean, I know the basics, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody with it right now, currently, or anything like that.
Wait, the Parkinson's law, not disease.
Oh, I thought you meant disease. No, I don't know.
That was the first thing that I thought of too. And this is it's 8:30, so this will probably be our last one here. Take advantage of your procrastination. I already don't know how I feel about this just after reading the title. And they actually go into it. This may sound counterproductive, but there's actually a method to the madness here. According to Parkinson's law, which was named after historian Cyril Parkinson, if you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. You've had a deadline. Okay, and this is an example. You've had a deadline at work looming over your head for a month, but you just cranked it out in the final week. This doesn't give you permission to wait until the 11th hour. It does, it does provide great leverage for efficiency, opposing shorter deadlines for tasks. I don't know how I feel about that one.
I saw a study on this recently too, where some procrastination actually improved productivity, and that's simply because it's like the lighting a fire under someone's ass effect. I don't know, probably a better way of saying that, but basically you get to a point where you are driven to do it because you have to, because you procrastinate to this point where you create like this drive that it needs to get done now. and wherein that drive might not have existed before, but because you had procrastinated. Now, you can't like procrastinate everything. That would make you less productive, but doing a little bit, especially for tasks that are like less desirable. Obviously, if you're procrastinating, that generally is the case. It gives you a reason to do a task where you didn't have a reason before, which ultimately makes it more productive, right? So I think what they're beginning to find is some procrastination is good because it simply gives you a reason to do a task where you might not have had a reason or a justification before. And that allows you to get through the task and to actually complete it. And because you procrastinate, you also have to do it quickly. So it allows you to do it faster because you have no choice at this point. You've given yourself no choice. You have to do it faster. So it's kind of funny that it's come to that place. And I think it'd be safe to say that we all procrastinate. And so it makes sense then as a part of human nature to do it. And that's kind of how we get things done, especially with less desirable tasks. So I actually agree with it as someone who procrastinates, and I normally judge myself very harshly for procrastinating. I started to realize, I've done it my entire life to some degree. Most other people do it too. It's not so bad, especially if I eventually get the things done. That's what matters. You just get the things done. So yeah, I generally don't procrastinate the things I really like to do. It's always the things that, they're less savory, I guess, to do. And
yeah.
But yeah, I did see a study on that I think that is the line of thinking now, and some of the research that they're doing is looking at that specifically. And I guess one of the conclusions was, that it can be more productive in smaller doses. I don't think you can be like fully a procrastinator on everything. That's not productive.
No, and this is where it's important because most content creators, the very, very vast majority, you're doing it for yourself. You're literally your own boss. So you have to be able to set those deadlines. And when you're the one that's setting the deadlines and you know that you can also continue to push that deadline back, especially, if it's not something that absolutely has to be done by a certain date, that can be tricky. But setting the deadline, if you want to procrastinate, stick to your deadline, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What's the phrase? You can't create a diamond without pressure.
That would actually match this very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's the pressure that you put on yourself then to perform. And if you think about like stage actors and actresses, the pressure to perform, the anxiety to perform, sometimes that helps us. Sometimes that propels us to do something. So I actually like this. The more I talk about it, the more I kind of like this one. I think it makes sense. Because procrastination does build up an anxiety within us that, we haven't done this, we should be doing it. But we haven't, we're putting it off, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, if we had no reason to do that task, now we do, if for the only reason is to remove the anxiety that we have for having not done the task, which sounds so complex, but humans work in weird ways, I guess.
Yeah, that's when I honestly, when I was reading through this before that, I just saw the headline. I was like, oh, well, this is going to be interesting. But hearing you talk about it and actually reading what they had to say, it makes a little bit of sense. So maybe procrastinating and doing everything at the last second is going to be your secret to success. Don't necessarily recommend it, but if you're going to procrastinate, don't tear yourself down for procrastinating. So, okay, that's all the time we got for today. Perrin, anything else? Anything you want to throw on top there, Cherry?
That's all I got. We'll be back. I don't know if we'll have AWOL this entire week. We'll see. He might be out. If so, we should have him back next week. We'll just see how it pans out, I guess.
Yeah, he's doing more important things. He's got to do his AWOL digital stuff. Good for him. Proud of him for doing it. Okay, so that is all we got for today. We will be back tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Central. If you want to watch the replay of this, head over to YouTube. It'll be up at some point this week. We post all of our replays there. You can go back and watch them because we know that with Periscope on Twitter, you can't really rewind and go back from certain spots. So we put it up on YouTube for that. You can find the audio version on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, literally everywhere where you can listen to an audio podcast. Hit us with that 5-star rating. We appreciate it. And we will be back tomorrow. Get to creating.